The stench of rust and mold filled the air, mixing with the persistent odor of filth and neglect. The cage was far too small for a dog of his size, and every time he moved, the metal bars groaned in protest. Cashin, once a proud and powerful German shepherd, was now frail, his ribs visible beneath his matted fur. His deep, weary eyes stared beyond the rusted bars with a mixture of resignation and fear. What else could he expect from life? For as long as he could remember, this had been his reality. A cold, cramped space, fed just enough to survive but never enough to live. The warehouse where Cashin was imprisoned was a decaying structure on the outskirts of town. Cracks lined the concrete walls, allowing dampness to seep through, and the floor was littered with old straw and shredded cardboard. He hadn't felt sunlight in what seemed like an eternity. Only faint beams of light seeped through the gaps in the rusted metal door. The shadows on the walls were his only companions, besides the rats that occasionally scurried too close. He no longer even bothered to growl at them. What was the point? His strength had long since faded. Then, something disrupted the monotony of his existence. Distant footsteps echoed through the warehouse, growing louder with each passing second. Cashin lifted his head with effort. He knew the footsteps of the man who kept him there, heavy, indifferent, merciless. But these were different, lighter, hesitant. He tried to catch a scent, but the overpowering smell of decay and rust masked everything else. Muffled voices reached his ears. One of them stood out. "Zephyr, are you seeing this? How could anyone let an animal end up like this?" The female voice carried a mix of disbelief and sorrow. "I knew it was going to be bad, Amorous, but this—" The male voice trailed off. "This is beyond cruel." The door creaked open with a drawn-out screech, and the flood of light momentarily blinded Cashin. He blinked, his vision adjusting, and saw the silhouettes of two people. The woman, Amorous, stepped forward cautiously, kneeling to get a closer look. Her eyes locked onto Cashin's, and in that moment, something stirred deep within him. A long-buried memory of what it felt like to be seen with kindness. "Hey boy," Amorous whispered, her voice now softer. She extended a hand, moving slowly, but Cashin flinched backward instinctively. Fear was stronger than hope. Zephyr moved beside her, inspecting the thick chains wrapped around the cage. "This is criminal. We're not leaving him here." Cashin didn't understand what was happening. This cage, this confinement, was all he had ever known, and any change felt like a threat. But deep down, buried beneath the years of neglect, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. Something told him that his life was about to change forever. Cashin's body remained tense, his muscles coiled as if expecting a blow. His instincts screamed at him to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The cage was too small, the rusted metal pressing against his sides. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow and rapid. He had learned long ago that humans meant pain, starvation, and loneliness. But these humans were different. Amorous remained crouched, her eyes locked onto his. She made no sudden moves, no aggressive gestures. Her hand, still outstretched, remained steady just beyond the bars. Zephyr stood beside her, arms crossed, his jaw tight with anger. Cashin could smell it, the frustration radiating off him. But it wasn't directed at him. That was new. "He doesn't trust us," Amorous murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you blame him?" Zephyr scoffed. "God knows how long he's been trapped here." Cashin's ears flicked at their words, but he didn't move. He didn't understand what they wanted. People had approached his cage before, but never like this. The man who kept him locked away only came to throw scraps at him, or worse. Zephyr took a step forward, examining the lock on the cage. His fingers traced over the rusted metal, testing its strength. He let out a frustrated sigh. "It's bolted shut. We're gonna need tools." Cashin let out a low, uncertain growl, not of aggression but of confusion. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he barely recognized. Hope? No, hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. Amorous didn't move, didn't flinch at the sound. Instead, She slowly reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled something out. Piece of bread. The scent hit Cashin's nose instantly. It wasn't much, but to a starving dog, it smelled like heaven. She placed the bread gently on the ground just outside the bars. No force, no commands, just an offering. "It's okay, boy," she said softly. "We're not here to hurt you." Cashin's stomach twisted with hunger, but he hesitated. He had been tricked before. Humans dangled food only to snatch it away. Sometimes they hit him if he reached too fast. His eyes flicked between Amaris's hand and the bread. She wasn't moving. She was just waiting. Minutes passed, the only sound in the warehouse being the distant creak of shifting metal. Then, cautiously, Cashin stretched his neck forward. His nose twitched as he sniffed the bread. No strange scents, no hidden dangers. His tongue darted out, taking a small, hesitant bite. Amaris smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not a smug one. Just soft, full of relief. "That's it," she whispered. "Good boy." Zephyr exhaled sharply. "This is gonna take time." Amaris glanced at him. "Then we take our time." Cashin didn't understand their words, but something in their tone made his ears twitch. There was no anger, no cruelty, just patience, just warmth. For the first time in years, the bars of his cage felt just a little less suffocating. Cashin licked the last crumbs of bread from the cold floor, his tongue scraping against rust and dirt. His body trembled, not just from weakness, but from something deeper. He had taken food from a human's hand for the first time in years, and nothing bad had happened. No sudden pain, no trick, just food. But still, he didn't move closer. His instincts screamed at him to stay put, to not trust too quickly. Hunger was one thing, hope was another. Amaris exchanged a glance with Zephyr, who was now crouching beside her, studying Cashin with a careful eye. "We need to get him out of here soon," Zephyr muttered, his fingers gripping the rusted lock. "This place is a death trap." Cashin's ears flicked at his voice, but he didn't react otherwise. He had heard so many human voices in his lifetime, most of them angry, cruel, impatient. This man sounded different. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just observed. Amaris slowly reached for the bars, wrapping her fingers around the cold metal. "We will," she whispered, "but we can't rush him." Cashin tensed. The last time a human had grabbed the cage like that, it had meant pain. His mind screamed for him to retreat. But something about Amaris's presence stopped him. She wasn't trying to force him. She was just there. Zephyr stood, dusting off his jeans. "I'll get the bolt cutters. Stay with him." Cashin watched as Zephyr walked away, his heavy boots echoing through the empty warehouse. Then it was just him and Amaris. She stayed quiet for a moment, as if giving him time to process everything. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag again, pulling out another small piece of bread, but this time she didn't place it on the ground. She held it in her open palm, offering it directly to him. Cashin's eyes flicked between her face and her hand. His stomach clenched in hunger, but his mind was louder. No human had ever been this patient with him before. No human had ever waited. He hesitated. Then, inch by inch, he lowered his head. His black nose twitched as he sniffed her fingers, waiting for a trap, waiting for the sting of betrayal. But it never came. Amaris remained still, her expression soft, her breathing calm. Cashin took the bread. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he ate from a human's hand. Amaris let out a quiet breath, her eyes glistening. "That's it, boy," she murmured. Cashin swallowed, his ears still back, his body still tense, but something inside him, something small, something fragile, had shifted. For the first time in years, the world outside his cage didn't seem so terrifying. And for the first time, he wondered if freedom was possible. Cashin's body remained rigid, his amber eyes fixed on Amaris as if trying to decipher her intentions. His heart pounded in his chest, his instincts at war with the unfamiliar sensation creeping into his bones. Trust. It was a dangerous thing to feel. He had learned that long ago. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse once again. Zephyr was back. In his hands, he carried a pair of bolt cutters, their metal glinting under the dim light. The sight of them sent a shiver down Cashin's spine. Tools like those had never meant anything good before. Amaris noticed his shift in posture, the way his ears pinned back against his skull, his muscles tensing as if preparing for the worst. She spoke softly. "It's okay, Cashin. We're not going to hurt you." His name. He had forgotten what it felt like to be called something other than dog or worthless mutt. His ears twitched at the sound, but he still didn't move. Zephyr crouched down beside the cage, inspecting the heavy chains that wrapped around its frame. "Damn, these are rusted solid," he muttered. "This might take a while." Cashin's eyes flicked toward him, watching every move. Zephyr was careful, deliberate. Nothing like the hands that had chained him here in the first place. He adjusted his grip on the bolt cutters and positioned them around the thickest part of the chain. Snap! The first link shattered, the sound reverberating through the warehouse like a gunshot. Cashin flinched violently, his body pressing against the farthest corner of the cage. His breathing turned erratic, his mind flashing with memories of pain, of nights spent curled up, waiting for the next strike. Amaris reacted instantly, placing a gentle hand against the bars. Not reaching in, not grabbing, just letting him know she was still there. "Breathe, Cashin. It's over. You're safe, safe." Another word that felt foreign. Zephyr moved to the next chain, working quickly but cautiously. He kept glancing at Cashin, making sure he wasn't pushing too far, too fast. Snap! Another link fell apart, clattering onto the concrete floor. The door rattled slightly, loosening for the first time in what felt like eternity. Cashin stared at it, his mind struggling to process what was happening. One more chain left, one more obstacle between him and freedom. Zephyr positioned the cutters again, his jaw tight with focus. "Almost there, buddy. Hang on." Cashin didn't know what to do. His whole life had been spent behind these bars. If they opened, what then? Where would he go? What waited for him outside this place? Snap! The final chain gave way, and the cage door creaked open an inch. Silence fell over the warehouse. Cashin didn't move. His paws remained glued to the cold ground, his body frozen with uncertainty. The exit was right there, but the fear was stronger. What if this was a trick? What if stepping outside meant something worse? Amaris didn't rush him. She just shifted back slightly, giving him space. "You can come out whenever you're ready, Cashin," she said softly. Zephyr sighed, standing up and brushing the rust off his hands. "We'll wait as long as it takes." The door to his prison was open, but was he ready to walk through it? For the first time in his life, the choice was his. The door stood open. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was no barrier between Cashin and the world beyond. But he didn't move. His body remained rigid, his paws planted firmly on the cold, filthy floor. He had spent too many years behind these bars, too many nights learning that hope was a dangerous thing. Zephyr exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "He's not moving," he murmured. Amaris, still crouched beside the cage, didn't take her eyes off Cashin. "He's afraid," she said softly. "This place is all he's ever known." Cashin's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, but his gaze remained locked on the sliver of freedom in front of him. The light outside the cage seemed almost too bright, too foreign. A part of him wondered if this was some kind of test, if stepping forward would bring punishment instead of freedom. Amaris reached into her bag again and pulled out another piece of bread, just like before. But this time she didn't place it near the cage. She placed it on the ground outside of it. Cashin's nostrils flared at the familiar scent. Hunger twisted his stomach, but the war inside him raged on. Could he trust this? Was it real? Zephyr took a slow step back, giving him even more space. "No pressure, buddy," he said quietly, "but the door's staying open." Cashin's mind screamed at him to stay put, to retreat, to hide. But another voice, small and unfamiliar, whispered something else. "Go." His muscles trembled as he took a hesitant step forward, one paw barely out of the cage, touching freedom for the first time. The sensation of the cold concrete outside the bars sent a shiver through his body. Nothing happened. No hands grabbing him. No shouting. No pain. Amaris held her breath. Zephyr didn't move. Cashin took another step. And another. His body felt unsteady, as if he had forgotten how to exist outside confinement. Then finally his back legs followed and he was out. Completely out. Amaris let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Cashin stood there, frozen, his body stiff with uncertainty. His eyes darted around, taking in the vast, unfamiliar space of the warehouse. He wasn't in a cage anymore, but that didn't mean he was safe. Zephyr crouched down, careful not to startle him. "You did it, big guy." Cashin didn't understand the words, but something in Zephyr's tone made his ears flick up slightly. Amaris slowly extended her hand again. Not to grab, not to restrain, just to let him know she was there. Cashin hesitated before lowering his head, his nose brushing her fingertips. A silent promise passed between them. "Let's get you out of here," Amaris whispered. The warehouse door loomed in the distance. Beyond it, a world Cashin had never known. And for the first time, he wasn't completely afraid of what came next. The warehouse door stood ahead, massive and rusted, its edges lined with chipped paint and years of neglect. A faint breeze slipped through the cracks, carrying scents Cashin had long forgotten. Fresh air, damp earth, and something he couldn't quite place. He hesitated, his body tense, his mind trapped between instinct and something new. Curiosity. Zephyr moved first, walking toward the exit with slow, measured steps. He glanced back at Cashin but didn't pressure him to follow. "It's different out there, buddy," Zephyr said, "but it's better than this place." Cashin didn't know if he believed that yet. He had spent so long behind bars that freedom felt like an illusion, something that could be ripped away at any moment. Amaris remained by his side, patient as ever. "We're going to take this at your pace," she murmured. Her voice was steady, warm. Cashin wasn't sure why, but it anchored him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, then took a step forward. The sound of his claws clicking against the concrete echoed through the warehouse. One step, then another. His body trembled with uncertainty, but he didn't stop. Zephyr pushed against the warehouse door, and it groaned loudly as it swung open. A burst of sunlight flooded the space, momentarily blinding Cashin. His ears flattened, and he instinctively took a step back, his breath quickening. Too bright, too open. Panic threatened to rise in his chest. But then, Amaris was there. She knelt beside him, not touching, not forcing. Just there. Cashin exhaled shakily, blinking against the overwhelming brightness. Slowly, the world came into focus. The sky stretched vast and endless above him, clouds drifting lazily across a sea of blue. The trees in the distance swayed gently, their leaves rustling in the wind. Birds chirped somewhere unseen. It was nothing like the cold, damp prison he had known all his life. He stepped outside. His paws met earth instead of concrete. The ground felt strange beneath him. Soft, uneven, alive. The sensation sent a shiver up his legs. But he didn't retreat. Amaris smiled. "There you go, Cashin." Zephyr let out a quiet chuckle. "First time touching grass, huh?" Cashin didn't understand the words, but the amusement in Zephyr's voice wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was kind. For the first time, Cashin lifted his nose and inhaled deeply. Scents rushed over him, grass, soil, the distant smell of water. He had spent so long surrounded by metal and filth that this was almost overwhelming. But there was no cage, no chains, just open space. His legs felt unsteady, but with each breath, something inside him settled. Amaris reached out slowly, giving him a chance to move away if he wanted. But this time Cashin didn't. Her fingers brushed lightly against his fur, and for the first time in years, he didn't flinch. Freedom wasn't just a door opening. It wasn't just stepping outside. It was this, the realization that no one was going to hurt him anymore. And for the first time, Cashin believed it. Cashin stood frozen, his paws pressed into the damp earth, his body rigid with uncertainty. The world beyond the warehouse stretched vast and unfamiliar. The wind ruffled his matted fur, carrying scents he barely recognized: fresh grass, distant water, the faint traces of animals he had never encountered. It should have been freeing. It should have felt like escape. Instead, it felt terrifying. Zephyr took a few steps ahead, glancing back over his shoulder. "You coming, big guy?" Cashin didn't move. His heart pounded against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat. The open space, the shifting sky, the sounds that came from nowhere. It was too much. He had spent his entire life behind walls, his world confined to filth and metal. Out here, everything felt uncertain, unpredictable. Amaris noticed the way his ears flattened, the stiffness in his legs. She knelt beside him, careful not to make any sudden movements. "It's okay, Cashin," she said gently. "It's a lot, I know." He didn't understand her words, but the tone, soft, patient, was different from anything he had ever known. Zephyr exhaled, looking up at the sky. "We can't stay here too long, Amaris. What if someone comes back?" Cashin tensed at those words. Someone coming back. That meant danger. That meant pain. He turned his head slightly, glancing back at the warehouse. The rusted cage was still there, the chains broken, the door hanging open. But the sight of it sent a shudder down his spine. If he stayed, someone would come back. The man who had left him there, the hands that had starved him, the voices that had mocked his suffering. They weren't gone forever. Zephyr was right. Cashin swallowed hard. His body trembled with the weight of years spent in fear, but something inside him whispered, "Go." Slowly, hesitantly, he lifted one paw. It hovered in the air for a moment before pressing into the grass. Then another. Amaris smiled, but she didn't cheer or rush him. She just stayed by his side, letting him take the step on his own terms. "That's it," she whispered. Zephyr grinned. "There you go, buddy." Cashin kept walking, his steps slow and unsteady. Every crunch of grass beneath his paws sent a jolt through his body. But with each step, the weight on his chest lessened just a little. Then suddenly a noise. Car engine in the distance. Cashin's body reacted before his mind could catch up. His ears flattened, his tail tucked, and in an instant he spun around, running back toward the warehouse. "Cashin!" Amaris called out. Zephyr cursed under his breath. But Cashin wasn't thinking. He wasn't in control. The sound had triggered something deep inside him, a fear so deeply ingrained that his body moved on instinct, back to where he was safe, back to where he knew what to expect. Even if that place had been a prison. He reached the warehouse entrance, skidding to a stop just before the rusted door. His breath came in rapid bursts, his eyes darting frantically. The cage was still there. The dark corners, the filthy floor, the stench of rust. It was familiar. It was what he knew. His chest rose and fell in quick, panic motions. Amaris and Zephyr weren't far behind, but they didn't chase him. They stopped a few feet away, giving him space. "He thinks he belongs there," Zephyr muttered. Amaris swallowed hard. "He doesn't know anything else." Cashin stood at the threshold, his body trembling. He could go back. He could retreat into the cold, dark familiarity of his cage. Or he could choose something different. For the first time, he had a choice. And the weight of that realization was almost more terrifying than the cage itself. Cashin stood at the threshold of the warehouse, his body trembling. The open cage sat in the shadows, waiting for him. It wasn't home, it had never been. But it was familiar. It was what he knew. The world outside was too vast, too uncertain. His instincts screamed for him to return to the cold metal walls that had trapped him for so long. Zephyr and Amaris stood behind him, watching, waiting. Neither of them moved to force him forward. They had freed his body from that prison, but only he could free himself from the cage inside his mind. Amaris took a slow step forward, her voice soft but firm. "Cashin, you don't belong there anymore." He flinched at her voice but didn't turn around. His breath was shallow, his ears pinned back. Every part of him was caught between two worlds, the past that had defined him and the future that terrified him. Zephyr sighed. rubbing the back of his neck. He's been in there so long, he doesn't know how to not be a prisoner. Cashin's eyes darted between the dark cage and the open sky. The memories clawed at his mind. Cold nights curled up on the hard floor, the clatter of chains, the sting of hunger. That life had been cruel, but it was predictable. Out here, he didn't know what to expect. What if he didn't belong? What if they changed their minds? What if this was just another trick? His breathing quickened, his body stiff with indecision. Then a sound, a sharp creak as Zephyr shifted his weight. Stepping onto a brittle twig, the snap echoed through the empty warehouse, and before Cashin could think, his body reacted, bolting back into the shadows. Emerus's heart sank. No, no, no. She took a step forward, but Zephyr gently grabbed her wrist. Don't chase him, he said quietly. If we push, he'll just retreat further. She swallowed hard, watching as Cashin curled himself into the farthest corner of the warehouse. His tail tucked so tightly against his body it was barely visible. His whole frame trembled, his breathing ragged. We can't just leave him in there, she whispered. Zephyr nodded. We won't, but we have to do this his way. Emerus bit her lip, then slowly lowered herself to the ground. Instead of approaching Cashin, she sat down at the entrance of the warehouse, crossing her legs. She wasn't blocking his way, just waiting. She reached into her bag and pulled out another small piece of bread. This time, she didn't even look at him. She just set it down beside her, resting her hands on her lap. Minutes passed. Cashin didn't move. His body remained tense, his gaze flicking between Emerus and the open door. Zephyr sighed and sat down beside her. You really think he'll come back out? Emerus exhaled, watching Cashin carefully. I think he wants to, but wanting and believing you can do something are two different things. Silence filled the air. The sun had started to lower in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink. A cool breeze slipped through the warehouse, carrying scents of grass and distant water. Cashin lifted his nose slightly, nostrils twitching. Smelled different, fresh, alive, not like this place. His eyes flickered to the piece of bread lying beside Emerus. She wasn't looking at him, wasn't calling him, wasn't forcing him. She was just there. Cashin swallowed hard. His legs felt like they were made of stone, but slowly, so slowly, he uncurled himself from the corner. His paws barely made a sound as he took one hesitant step forward, then another. Zephyr and Emerus didn't move. The bread was just a few feet away. The door was open. Cashin stopped, standing at the edge of the light. His body was still half hidden in the darkness of the warehouse, but his nose was in the sun. His heart pounded. One more step and he'd be outside again. One more step and there'd be no turning back. His mind screamed at him to retreat, but then he didn't. His paw touched the ground outside. Zephyr held his breath. Emerus didn't dare move. Cashin hesitated, his body still tense. But then he took another step, and another. He didn't stop until the warehouse was behind him. The chains, the rusted cage, the darkness. All of it. Emerus smiled, her eyes shining. That's it, Cashin. Zephyr let out a small laugh of relief. Welcome to the real world, buddy. Cashin didn't know what the future held. He didn't know where they were taking him, or if he even knew how to live outside a cage. But for the first time in his life, he was willing to try. Cashin stood outside, his body still tense, his mind racing. The warehouse, the only home he had ever known, was behind him now. The open world stretched ahead, vast and uncertain. Zephyr exhaled, running a hand through his hair. That's it, buddy. You're out. Emerus smiled but stayed quiet, letting Cashin process it on his own. She knew that leaving the cage was only the first step. Trusting them, that would take time. Cashin's ears twitched at the rustling of trees, the distant chirping of birds. Every sound made his muscles tighten, ready to flee. But there were no chains, no bars. Emerus pulled a leash from her bag, moving slowly. You don't have to wear this forever, but just until we get you somewhere safe. Okay? Cashin flinched at the sight of it. His whole body stiffened. Zephyr's voice was calm. It's not a trap, big guy. It's just so you don't get lost. Cashin's mind fought against the idea. But something in Emerus's patient gaze made him hesitate. She wasn't forcing him. She was asking. After a long pause, he lowered his head slightly. Emerus gently clipped the leash to his collar. "Thank you for trusting me, Cashin." For the first time, Cashin felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not fear, not pain, something close to hope. Cashin moved slowly, his paws pressing into the soft earth with uncertainty. The leash attached to his collar felt foreign. But unlike the chains that had once bound him, this one was different. It was loose, light. It didn't restrain him, it guided him. And for the first time, he wasn't being dragged somewhere against his will. Every step he took was his own choice. The air outside was different. It wasn't thick with the scent of rust and filth. Instead, the wind carried fresh smells. Grass, damp earth, the faint trace of something sweet in the distance. Cashin lifted his head slightly, sniffing the breeze. His ears flicked at the unfamiliar sounds. Birds chirping, leaves rustling. The faint hum of a world he had never truly been part of. It was also new, so overwhelming. But for the first time, new didn't mean dangerous. Zephyr walked beside him, hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning Cashin with quiet observation. "You're gonna like where we're taking you, big guy. No cages, no cold floors, just a real home." Cashin didn't understand the words, but something in Zephyr's tone made his body relax. Just a little. The tension in his shoulders, always present, always preparing for the worst, began to fade. Emerus walked on the other side, the leash in her hand, but she didn't pull. She never had. She let Cashin move at his own pace, patient as ever. After a few minutes, she reached out slowly, her fingertips brushing against his fur. Cashin tensed for a split second, but then, he let it happen. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. Emerus smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe now." Cashin turned his head, just slightly, meeting her gaze. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. As they walked further from the warehouse, the rusted building that had once been his prison grew smaller in the distance. Cashin didn't turn back. He didn't need to. The past no longer had a hold on him. For the first time, he was walking toward something instead of running away. His past was behind him. His future was unknown. But for the first time in his life, he was free.